Hello. January. It's about the 11th today, 2023. I thought, well, I should join the rest of the world and many others who do podcasts and welcome you to the new year and say goodbye to the old year, knowing that what was in the old year will be in the new year. Just turn my heater off here. I got myself all warmed up. I got my little studio set up here and sitting in my basement, and I was thinking tonight what's important that I want to share. And I thought, well, I've seen a few podcasts and people giving their 2023 little speech and or coaching session. And I just noticed that the word courageous, be courageous, let's stand up to righteous justice, and let's believe in love again. Let's believe in the possibilities of the future, all those good things, right, for New Year. And I thought, okay, it's all fine. I'm a little disappointed in, some of the people that I think are really important voices on the planet today, philosophically and spiritually, politically. And that's about all they could kind of come up with, be courageous. And I have to say, honestly, that over the past many years, but particularly the last few years, I've watched this arise so often of go out there and let's be courageous. We can do it. And I keep thinking, wow, that is so uninformative, uneducative. And okay, sure, if you want a life coach who wants to, continually boost you up and try to give you a little flame that you need for your life, maybe it helps, right? Maybe it doesn't. Who's to say? I'm certainly not going to predict or tell people what they should hear or should not hear from our great leaders, those who are the inspirational leaders of our time. I won't even mention the names because that's not so important of those who produce those kinds of messages. But obviously, if you followed my work, even if you haven't, if this is the first time, I am not going to be the one to put out hope, be hopeful, be courageous, be humble, all these kinds of virtues that, sure, understandably have a great long tradition. I respect that tradition, but I'm also someone who is a little bit of obviously a rebel in many ways, a little bit. And I have my own views of what I want to promote, and fearlessness is going to be the path that I promote. Nothing new, goes back in my history to be a purveyor of that kind of thinking. Now there's a paradox here in my presentation on fearlessness and how to practice it. So I'm giving something very practical for the new year. Good for me. But I am really a philosopher, a theorist, and critical thinker, social critic, educator, and utmostly I'm interested, are we learning something new? Are we actually inviting some kind of new learning trajectory? So that's why those statements like be courageous just doesn't provide the nuanced trajectory for an educative experience, in my opinion. All right, so a paradox. Early in the 80s, as I remember going to this person's house, it was a solar house, and it was my first time I'd ever been in somebody who actually built a solar house. He had a solar business at the time, and that was pretty radical for the early 1980s. And I remember on his bookshelf, I'm sitting there and just going, wow, this is great. No electricity. He's doing this all natural. But I remember looking at the bookshelf when I had a few hours to spare one day, and I picked up a book off the shelf, and it was Choygam Trungpa Rinpoche, Tibetan master who came to North America in 70s in that period. I'm not exactly sure, but in America he came and was told that he was to bring Tibetan Buddhism to the new world, right? Happened to many spiritual teachers that time, still happening today. And that book was called Shambhala, Path of the Sacred Warrior, I believe. And yeah, it's been a real, it was published in yeah, 1987 or so, and 85. And it was a really interesting little quick scan as I went through. Not that I was into reading a lot of Buddhism, although I had been introduced to Buddhism earlier in my 20s, through some of the teachers, East West peoples, and coming out of California and so on. But this little book was definitely different. It attracted me at some kind of soul level. So I'm going to use that word, soul level 2023. I'm asking and invoking people to do some learning on their soul path, for lack of another word, and I will also call that the path of fearlessness. I actually do think the soul path is part of the engagement and guidance for educating ourselves on this planet in that soul domain. And I'll leave that wide open for interpretation at the moment. I don't come from any one tradition, but this Buddhist path, when I was reading it, it is to me a soul language. It's not just contemporary self-help psychology that you get so much in the Western world. And the reason is it starts upon the archetypes. So Choygam Trungpa goes upon this archetypal comparison, and he calls it the sunset vision and the sunrise vision. And the sunrise vision, I'll start there because that's the light, moving toward the light. That would be what we might call the positive, although he didn't use it that way. But it's where the sun rises, which is the archetype of coming over the horizon and this radical faith in the new beginning. Sounds all appropriate, good for a new year kind of attention. But then on the other side, he also says, and this is why I like it, compared to just the New Year one-sided approach to a spiritual path, or the path of enlightenment, right? The light, where the light is arising. He says, then there's the sunset vision. And that's, in his metaphoric and somewhat real soul understanding, is the path of diminishing from this sunrise vision to when we start to move more and more habitually, conditioned and traumatically, to the sunset vision. Now, it got really interesting when he said that sunrise vision is fearlessness. The sunset vision is fear. Now, he could have said, maybe he did, I don't remember per se, I've looked at that book, but not lately. I don't see a lot of love talk, waiting for the miracle of love. Let's just love enough. Love is the answer. No, not in the soul work. It was much more fear and fearlessness. In one of the chapters, I think it was chapter 2 in that book, Shambhala, Path of the Sacred Warrior, is this comparison, and it's entitled Fear and Fearlessness. And I'm reading this, and this is just like Education 101 on fear and fearlessness. Whoa, like, as an educator, I want to put that in all the curriculum everywhere, right? That was my immediate reaction. Even though back then I say all that, but back then in the mid 80s, I did not have that same consciousness of what I was doing and thinking, and that someday, 1989, late 1989, that would become my entire life purpose based upon a vision. We'll go into that detail. I've talked about it in other videos. Is really the story for the In Search of Fearlessness project as a contradiction to the Fear project. Could have said in Tibetan Buddhism terms, after Choygam Trungpa's tradition of the Shambhala tradition. It's not Trungpa. He's just one of the purveyors of that ancient tradition, probably 5, 6, 7,000 years. I have no idea exactly, but it's in that caliber of a tradition, of when fear and fearlessness are given such priority, and you look one way, you look the other, fear-based, non-fear-based. Sunset vision, fear-based, sunrise vision, fearlessness based. So then he articulates that it is a path, and it's not the elimination of fear, and that will bring us to fearlessness. It was really a deep understanding of fear. Notice how different that is than these contemporary teachers, many of them leaders of today, who are encouraging us to be courageous. It's just not the same rhetoric, is it? I mean, you can feel it. It's like it has so little depth to say that in the terms of the kind of depth of this soul learning, teaching, guidance. And so that's what I offer tonight, just as a little theoretical vision for you and a philosophical vision. It's cosmological, really, and it's indigenous. If you go back to the Shambhala tradition, it's a very deep tradition, long before the industrial modern world. And who knows how far back, right? That tradition, when it was actually called the Shambhala tradition, that kind of teaching that I just described, these two visions, that can go back early. We don't know how far that goes back. Again, may not have used that language, fear and fearlessness, as Trungpa did, but he laid down those tracks, and because I was in 1989 became a bit of a fanatic in wanting to study everything about fear and fearlessness I could, obviously that's a track you don't want to miss in a basic 101 education about fear and fearlessness in this world and in our life and in our soul path, and the choicing, the decisions we make, and the analysis and understanding we have to make those good decisions along that trajectory of distinction from fear to fearlessness, to just use simple language. He's not the only one to use that language. I'm not the only one to use that language, from fear to fearlessness. And in a way, that language is actually quite misconstruing of the actual reality of the path. I'm not here to do a lecture on that distinction, fear and fearlessness per se. Let's let the imagination right now, and as we move into this, we're right kind of in the middle of the zone, right? We're in the liminal zone as January is still unfolding and 2023 is still going to show up however it is. We just kind of let that sit in the soup, right? Let's let it come and digest. Let it become part of you to think about. And it's not just rational. Oh, what book can I do to Dr. Fisher? What do I have to do to get to this? So there's a lot of people still operating from this need-based, fear-based, jumping, panic-based almost. How am I going to handle the future of 23? My vision right now, maybe you're thinking, is not so pretty. And I've actually said that in one of my videos. 2023, I think, is going to be a real tough year. A lot of spiraling and heavy consequences of COVID and its costs, and never mind all the other world problems, which is not what I'm here to talk about tonight. So the paradox of that vision is really, it's saying move to the sunrise rather than the sunset, as you think about the possibility of the next moment and the next day. So it's kind of a death, right, and rebirth, and paying attention to the birthing aspect, not just the death and dying process of the sunset vision. But that death and dying process he was speaking about in the fear-based condition is more than just death. It is a toxic, unnecessary, destructive suffering. One might use those words. And again, necessary, unnecessary, who's to tell, who's to judge? But we would definitely, and he writes in that tradition, and I agree with it, it is a pathological condition under the times that we're in. Okay? So it's not just some kind of absolute he's setting up here metaphysically, but under the conditions of the arising modern, postmodern Western world. that's where and when he wrote the book, even though it's of a tradition, the Shambhala tradition, going way back before the West was established, at least talking about the modern West and the colonizers moving here to the West. So I'm not going to speak about the indigenous traditions that were here in the West long before. They're not included in a lot of these generalizations, and I'm not really someone qualified to talk about those. So the paradox of that is, it sounds like the sunrise vision of this fearlessness is one of not looking at or trying to move away from that negative dark, right, so-called. But that's not how he was also constructing the argument for this path of liberation and the path of the sunrise. Too nuanced to go into here in this short video. But the idea is also that we need to look at both, because the sun rising for me is going to be the sun setting for someone else on the planet. The sun setting for someone on the planet, is going to be a sun rising for someone else on the planet. So when you take a whole global perspective, a cosmic perspective even, it's not one or the other in that simple way. So we're talking about a dialectical relationship of fear and fearlessness unfolding. But we still choice. We choice to how are we going to look. And so in simple sort of psychological terms, you can look to the worst condition of what's happening and get stuck and obsessed with the sunset, the death and the dying, decay and pathologies. You can get stuck also in just the light and looking at the positive, the healthy, the wellness, use, not dying. So what I gathered from the Path of Fearlessness in that reading, as I've studied it since then, when I finally got the book much later, and I've looked at it many times before, and I've crafted my own visions and ideas, my own theorizing and philosophy, really a fearlessness philosophy is what I say I'm offering to the world in this lifetime, is that you also, and this is many mystical traditions, wisdom traditions say this, you also have to become friends with death. Now, that means you really want to understand the sunset vision. But remember, some of it's pathological and some of it's just death. It's the dying process. It's the deconstruction side before the reconstruction, before rebirth. So just keep that distinction in mind. But in the fear work that I do, yeah, you are sticking your head in a lot. The Path of Fearlessness is asking you to stick your head a lot in the world of fear. And that's why you have to really understand it. That's why his chapter, Fear and Fearlessness, it was an entire beginning of a teaching. It was just a small chapter because it was a very popular book. He meant it to be popular. And I write that way, but I go into much more complexity and at length, some too much, at times to my own demise of finding an audience for my work. But you can certainly get lots of pieces from it, and that's the important thing. Don't try and get it all at once. But the piece tonight is a really simple part, which I'll end the video on, which is this practical side of a practice for 2023, fearlessness practice, an educative practice, habit in a good way that is worth practicing and or thinking about. As I said, take it in to this liminal space of this early part of the year. Won't have to turn it into a commitment for the new year. Not interested in those kinds of grabbing tendencies. So again, sticking in the flavor of a good Buddhist practice of letting go, attending, letting go, attending, focus, let go, deeper, let go. So you don't have to create this grabbing obsessiveness of the fear patterning addiction itself, right? To wanting to get. I'm addicted to getting to the light. You get the drift. So the practice that I offer really was an insight tonight, and that's probably why I'm doing this talk. Yeah, I know I didn't tell you about that earlier. It was motivated, this presentation tonight, on journaling about waking up after my nap. Okay, the short story of my nap history. So napping, interestingly enough, has come into the work of my partner, Barbara Bickle, and her Gestari Art Collective. They were doing nap-ins as part of their artistic communal practice, spiritual practice for years. So that influences me because I live with my partner. And then I started napping, I think it was just kind of after my dissertation, 2003, into those years. And when I think of the story I've created around my napping, it's been I was tired and I was a bit depressed because I didn't get the career job, and that trajectory didn't look like it was going to unfold for me at that time in my life when I really put everything into it, money wise, time, energy. I got to make this, academic career professorship work. And it didn't work, for a lot of reasons. Big story. So the short story is I was just trying to, quote, cope with, do some healing with, but I was in a pretty strong depressive energy of the unsuccess, the failure, and what am I going to do now? And I got all this debt load, et cetera, et cetera. And, it's basically feeling a lot of rejection in the world. So then not being too hopeful at that point, even though that's not my dependency on being hopeful, it still is always there that, yeah, I need to, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go next? I need to have a vision. So this was, again, quite a few years after my In Search of Fearlessness vision and that great born again time. And eventually sort of wears off over time for most of us visionaries. And, it still sticks around, it doesn't disappear, but it's like then you have to crash on the everyday realities of how do you bring about that vision to manifest in a way that would be satisfying and feel effective. That's been the hard path. I mean, the vision's not so hard, relatively. So the depression led to me just wanting to make the day shorter. When I was alone for very long periods of time, it seemed everybody else around me, including my partner, were all busy building something, a career, or going to university, graduate school, or just people were carrying on their lives. And mine was like not a good cycle. It's not my, arising part of my life. It's my dissipating part, right? The deconstruction part. And so, yeah, all my pathologies will arise too, my woundedness. And it was a dark time for several years. And what I noticed is I used the 1.5 to 2 hours nap as just a way to kind of get out of the world and all that pressure and burden and kind of disappear a bit, right? On the couch or into a bedroom. And I never ever set an alarm. And that's what I'm encouraging you to think about in the napping process, because to this moment and now, as I talk to you, I would swear by this process as being extremely important to, I'm just going to use health and wellness, but no, I'm also talking about the soul journey. And that's how I'll end the video. Why is it part of the soul's journey and this path of fearlessness as I understand it today? Well, that the napping is a moment of decision. And yes, it can become a practice, which it is for me. I've done it ever since, pretty much. Very rare do I miss that opportunity to have a nap. Again, 90 minutes, sometimes less, sometimes more. The odd rare time I can't even fall asleep because too much hype going on inside me. I cannot let go enough. So there's the key word. For this sunrise vision, to be able to exist with the sunset vision and you not be pulled by one or the other out of a kind of synchronous harmony, you have to be able to continually let go into a dying process, because the ego my success, my fighting to get somewhere and be somebody in the world, and all the different ways you might manifest that compared to how I might manifest that. But for me as a teacher, in the largest sense, I have to let go of not being able to be the kind of teacher success, whatever, that I want to, that I need to, that I should accomplish. And that's a really good practice. So a lot of ancient traditions I've heard from different speakers at different times say that keeping a skull on your desk, an image of something that reminds you of the death and dying process, your own impermanence, to use Buddhist language, and to realize that your, me, my are really not anything much in terms of the whole cosmos of movement of life and death, birth, rebirth. They're a pretty small feature of reality, that egocentric positioning of a self, small self. So the nap, what I realized, particularly as I was writing, and this was a brand new insight right after 20 years of napping, usually in the latter part of the afternoon. The insight in journaling tonight was, okay, whoa, I didn't realize it wasn't just a way to get out of the world or rest, because I'd also looked at that physiological literature. There's a lot of support for napping as a healthy practice, and I knew many other cultures, particularly in the South, use napping a lot, and always have culturally, anthropologically. So I kind of knew I wasn't doing something, not healthy. But fundamentally, I didn't want to, also go into researching all that literature of, I'm going to live longer because I'm napping more. Because that can be another striving, right? Another attachment to living longer, happier. So what I focused on tonight was realizing, oh, I make a decision because I said, wow, I was like gone for almost 2 hours tonight. I'm in the house alone, so it's very quiet. And I don't use anything to wake me up. I do not want to be shocked out of the arising from nothing. I do not want to be called by an alarm. Okay, wake up, you're back to normal life. Get busy. No, I actually felt I was so deep in sleep tonight. And sometimes I'm aware of that when I wake up. But whoa, where'd I go? Whoa. And then the insight is that, well, man, that's like death. You let go, you died. Really sunk into dying. And the neat thing about doing it in the middle of the day is you have to make the decision to die. Not be productive, not be doing something, not be somebody, not be the image on the computer, on your Facebook or whatever, your job, your career, your roles. Now, I know not everybody can nap for various reasons, and I'm not here to try and convince you should nap. I just said take it in for digestion, indigestion, and perhaps something will come from it at a soul level. And maybe it's not now that you'll nap, maybe it'll be in a year, maybe it's in 10 years, maybe 20 years. But what I realized so important for me in the path of fearlessness is to let go. Some people have said, love is letting go of fear. You remember that from the 80s. Course in Miracles, Jim Polsky, that famous book. But you can find it in many traditions. And for me, it was really letting go of having to hold it all together and be in control. So that's a part of the practice of fearlessness. it obviously, a lot of fearlessness also involves discipline and taking control in a non-obsessive, good way that allows a lot of porosity, a lot of impermanence, a lot of wabi-sabi in the aesthetic of the Japanese tradition, and so on. That one could explore this a lot, and I do in my work, is how to create this aesthetic of an organicity, an organicness that reflects and is in a way continually allowing the natural processes, capital N, if you will, natural way to be. And I'm exploring that through the process of mapping of how to be a natural human being, if you want to put it that way. Integrated human being, as some have used, integral being, etc., etc. And that allows me to be practicing to die, knowing I may not wake up. That was the real insight today. Whoa, I could have just as easily not woke up. Okay, so then what insight comes? Whoa, okay, Mr. Contemplative. Yeah, you paying attention? Yeah. Oh, that's called grace. Maybe it's called providence. Maybe it's called instinct, the natural way, the Tao, is that you are to let go completely. You're not to wake yourself up unless you're meant to be woken up. Meant to be woken up by what? Who? I don't know. Creator? That's what I just contemplated on for a moment. You know, whoa, okay. That's really allowing. I'm here, journaling about my nap just a few minutes ago. And whoa, okay. The spirit said we want you here. Again, you can see it's hard to put language on this. And so there's no excuses not to be here. It's a gift. And it's sort of a gratitude practice, but I'm not trying to make this a gratitude practice, actually. I'm just trying to make it an insightful, educative moment. And I've tracked through it long enough on this video. Thanks for hanging in if you did hang in this whole time. Let's continue the conversation about Path of Fearlessness. I've given you, one little small micro piece of it today. Thanks very much. Talk to you soon.